I found out my husband was in love with his therapist on a Tuesday night in October when he looked at me across the dinner table with tears in his eyes and said he didn't know if he could keep living the lie anymore. And when I asked him what lie he was talking about, expecting him to confess an affair or a gambling problem or something concrete I could actually fight against, he said the lie that I made him happy, and I felt my entire body go cold because that's not something you can argue with. It's not something you can fix with couples counseling or date nights or trying harder. It's just this absolute statement that rewrites your entire history together. We'd been married for 9 years, together for 12, and I thought we were doing okay, not perfect but okay. We had our routines and our inside jokes, and we still had sex maybe twice a month, which everyone says is normal after this long. And sure, Mark had been struggling with depression on and off since his mom died 3 years ago, but I thought we were handling it. I thought I was being supportive. I went with him to pick out the right medication. I gave him space when he needed it. I suggested the therapy in the first place because I loved him and wanted him to feel better. Her name was Dr. Cara Mitchell, and she had an office in one of those renovated Victorian houses downtown with plants everywhere and those Tibetan singing bowls on the shelf. And Mark started seeing her twice a week back in March, and at first it seemed like it was helping. He seemed lighter somehow, more present. He'd come home from sessions and actually want to talk to me about his day instead of just collapsing in front of the TV. And I remember thinking, thank God we found someone good, thank God he's finally opening up. But then sometime around June things shifted in a way I couldn't quite name at first. He started mentioning her more, like Cara thinks I have unprocessed grief about my childhood, or Cara helped me understand why I shut down during conflict. And I tried to be supportive because isn't that what therapy is supposed to do? Help you understand yourself. But there was something about the way he said her name, something soft and careful, like he was holding something fragile. He started dressing better on therapy days, putting on cologne, and when I mentioned it he got defensive and said he just wanted to present himself well, that it was about self-respect. And I felt crazy for even noticing, because what kind of wife gets jealous of her husband's therapist? That's insane, that's controlling, so I pushed it down. Then in August he told me that Cara said something that really resonated with him. She told him that he'd been living his life trying to make other people comfortable and that he'd lost touch with what actually made him feel alive. And she said that in their last session she noticed he seemed different, lighter. And when she asked him what changed, he told her he'd spent the weekend hiking alone, and she said she could see it in his eyes, that he looked happy, really happy. And she told him, you deserve to feel this way all the time, Mark. You deserve to know what brings you joy. He told me this story while we were getting ready for bed, and he had this look on his face like he was telling me about a religious experience. And I said, that's great, honey. I'm so glad the therapy is working. But inside I felt something ugly rising up because I'd been trying to make him happy for years. I'd been the one suggesting hikes and trips and new hobbies. And suddenly this woman he'd known for 5 months could see something in him that I'd apparently been missing. I started paying more attention after that, started really listening to what he said about their sessions, and I realized he was talking about her the way people talk about someone they're falling for. He'd mention these tiny details, like how she had this way of tilting her head when she was really listening, or how she always remembered little things he'd mentioned weeks ago. Or how she told him once that working with him was the highlight of her week because his progress had been so remarkable. That one stopped me cold. The highlight of her week. What kind of therapist says that to a patient? Isn't that crossing some kind of line? But when I looked it up online, all I could find was articles about the therapeutic relationship and how it's supposed to be warm and supportive. And I started wondering if I was the problem. If I was so insecure and broken that I was sexualizing a professional relationship because I couldn't handle my husband getting help. We got into our first real fight about it in September when I finally asked him point blank if he had feelings for Cara. And he looked at me like I'd slapped him and said, how could you even ask me that? She's helping me. She's the first person who's ever really understood what I've been through. And I said, I've been here the whole time. I've been trying to understand. And he said, no, Annie, you've been trying to fix me. There's a difference. Cara just listens without trying to make it better. She lets me be broken. And I didn't know what to say to that, because wasn't I supposed to want to help him feel better? Wasn't that what love was? He started staying later at sessions. What used to be 50 minutes turned into 70, then 90. And when I asked about it, he said they were just really making breakthroughs and Cara didn't want to cut him off when he was in the middle of processing something important. And I wanted to ask if she charged him for the extra time, but I didn't because I didn't want to sound petty. Then one night in late September I was putting away laundry and I found a card in his jacket pocket. One of those expensive ones from the fancy stationery store with hand-painted flowers on the front. And inside it said, Mark, watching you come back to yourself has been one of the greatest privileges of my career. You have so much light in you and I'm honored to help you find your way back to it. Keep shining, Cara. I stood there in our bedroom holding this card and I felt like I was going to throw up because that's not normal. That's not professional. You don't give your therapy patient a card telling him he has light in him. That's not clinical language, that's romantic language. But when I confronted Mark about it that night, he said I was being paranoid and controlling. That Kara had given him the card at the end of a particularly difficult session where he'd finally opened up about some childhood trauma, and she wanted him to remember that he was worthy of love and healing. And he said the fact that I was making this into something dirty said more about me than it did about her. We barely spoke for a week after that, and I felt like I was losing my mind. I'd go to work and sit at my desk staring at spreadsheets and wonder if I was actually crazy, if I was manufacturing this whole thing because I was threatened by the fact that my husband was getting better, because maybe I'd gotten comfortable with him being depressed, maybe I liked being the strong one, the caretaker, maybe I was the toxic one after all. But then I came home early one day in early October because I had a migraine, and I heard him on the phone in his office, and I stood in the hallway like a cliché listening to my own husband. And I heard him say, I know, you told me I need to be honest with her, but I don't know how. She'll never understand. You understand me in a way she just can't. And there was a pause, and then he laughed. Actually laughed in this soft, intimate way I hadn't heard in years. And he said, you make me feel like myself again, like the person I was supposed to be before everything got so complicated. I walked away before I could hear any more, and I went into the bathroom and cried so hard I thought I might break something inside myself. That night at dinner was when he told me he couldn't keep living the lie. And when I asked him if he was in love with Kara, he said it wasn't like that. It wasn't romantic. But she made him feel understood in a way he'd never felt before. Not even with me, especially not with me. And he said she'd told him in their last session that his growth had been extraordinary and that she felt like they'd formed a real connection. Something rare and special. And she told him that sometimes the therapeutic relationship can be the first time a person experiences unconditional positive regard, and that what he was feeling was natural and healthy and part of the healing process. I asked him if they'd ever touched, ever crossed any physical boundaries, and he said no, never. Kara would never do that, she has ethics, but he admitted that he thought about her constantly, that he woke up thinking about their next session, that her opinion mattered to him more than anyone else's, including mine. And he said he didn't know what to do because he knew it wasn't appropriate, but he couldn't help how he felt. And she told him that they needed to explore these feelings in therapy, because avoiding them would only make them more powerful. I asked him if Kara knew the extent of what he was feeling, and he said yes, they'd been talking about it for weeks. And she told him that this kind of transference was common and that the best way to handle it was to work through it together in the safety of the therapeutic relationship. And I said, Mark, she's keeping you dependent on her. Can't you see that? A good therapist would refer you to someone else if this was happening. And he said, I knew you wouldn't understand. Kara said, you'd probably react this way because you feel threatened by my growth. We've been sleeping in separate rooms for 3 weeks now, and he's still seeing her twice a week. And I've called the state licensing board, but they said unless there's been a sexual relationship they can't really do anything about a therapist being too emotionally involved. They said it's a gray area. And I've begged Mark to see someone else, but he says switching therapists now would undo all his progress. And Kara told him that my resistance to his healing is a sign of my own unresolved issues. I don't know what to do anymore. I don't know if I'm the villain in this story or if I'm watching my husband be emotionally manipulated by someone who's supposed to help him. I don't know if I'm jealous or justified. I don't know if love is supposed to feel like this, like you're fighting for someone who's already halfway out the door. I don't know if I should stay and fight or if leaving would be the kindest thing I could do for both of us. And the worst part is that Mark does seem happier. He smiles more, he has energy, he started painting again, which he hasn't done since college. And I catch myself wondering if maybe I was the problem all along, if maybe the most loving thing I can do is let him go, let him find whatever it is he thinks he's found with her, even though the thought of it makes me want to disappear. And last night he told me that Kara said in their session yesterday that sometimes people grow in different directions and that's nobody's fault, it's just life, and he looked at me with something like pity in his eyes and asked me if I'd ever considered that maybe we got married too young, maybe we didn't know who we really were. And I wanted to scream that I know exactly who I am. I'm the person who held him when his mom died, who paid our bills when he couldn't work, who loved him through every dark season. But instead I just said, maybe you're right, maybe I don't understand you at all. And I went upstairs and lay in bed in the dark wondering when exactly I became the obstacle to my own husband's happiness. Wondering if there's a version of this story where I'm not the bad guy. Wondering if anyone else has ever felt this specific kind of heartbreak where you're losing someone not to another woman exactly but to the idea of who he could be without you.